So we're going to have a little introduction tonight. Next week we're going to continue with the topic of Bikar Cholim, visiting the sick, and some specific questions within that. But before we get to specific mitzvahs, we might touch on Bikar Cholim tonight. But a little introduction in terms of, if we look through Sefer Bereshis, if we look through the book of Bereshis, we find many different hanhagas of Klal Yisrael. We find this week's parsha, God doing Bikar Cholim. We have Avraham entertaining guests, Hachnasas Archim. We find comforting the mourner. Many of the basic midos that we have, we learn from the Avos. So the question is, the fact that the Avos did it, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Imahos, does that make it into a mitzvah, or less than a mitzvah, more than a mitzvah? So we'll come back to that question after we have a brief introduction, or a long introduction. So the Rambam in the Perish HaMishnayos in Chulin and Daf Kuf Amid Beis, he talks about the mitzvah of Gid Hanasha, not to eat from the sciatic nerve. So he quotes a Mishnah in Chulin between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. What is the extent of this prohibition? From what type of animal can you eat this Gid Hanasha? So Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is any animal, whether it's a kosher animal, a behemoth tahora, a behemoth tameya, it doesn't make a difference. The prohibition of Gid Hanasha applies to all animals. And the Chachamim say no. It only applies to a behemoth tahora. It only applies to a kosher animal, because that's the animal you could eat, and then you tell me this one part of the animal you can't eat. But we have a principle, ein iser chal al iser, that you can't have one prohibition for another one. If the whole animal is prohibited already, what's the difference to say there's another prohibition? If you can't have it, you can't have it. So therefore, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So it's a dispute in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says it applies to all animals, and the Chachamim say no, it only applies to a kosher animal, because there's no point of extending it to a non-kosher animal. You can't eat it anyway. So Rabbi Yehuda tries to prove its point by saying he's right. How do I know it's right? Because where do we find Gid Hanasha? We find it by the children of Yaakov, by the Bnei Yaakov. So just like in the time of Yaakov's children, the Torah wasn't given yet. There were no kosher animals, non-kosher animals. The same way, Gid Hanasha applied when it was originally given to the children of Yaakov, and there was no difference between kosher animal and non-kosher. So too, even today, it doesn't make a difference. It should apply equally to both kosher and non-kosher. That's Rabbi Yehuda's taina. So comes along the Chachamim and they say no. The language of the Gemara is no. Misinai nesra b'nichta b'mkomo. In other words, it says it was written, it became prohibited on Har Sinai when the Torah was given, but it's written in its place. What does that mean? Very ambiguous and vague. So that's a discussion among the earlier commentators, the Rishonim, what it means. So Rashi says, what happened with Gid Hanasha? The Rashi says, it was never prohibited to the children of Yaakov. It was only the first time Gid Hanasha became prohibited was at Har Sinai. When the Torah was given, when Moshe gave over the Torah to the Jewish people, that's when the prohibition of Gid Hanasha applied. It did not apply at all to the children of Yaakov. Alright, so what do you mean? Rashi says, but why did the Torah write it in Parshas Vayishlach if it doesn't apply? So that's what it means. Nikta b'mkomo, it wanted to teach us about the history, the motivation, the intent. When you want to know about the ethics, some questions about where it originated, we look to Bnei Yaakov, but it was never prohibited to them. It was before the Torah was given. There was never a problem. It's only Misinai. It only became prohibited at Har Sinai. And that's the way Rashi learns. And the Sefer HaChasidim learns similar. He also says it was never prohibited to Bnei Yaakov, only at Har Sinai. And he adds another qualification. He says, but during the time of the Bnei Yaakov, they accepted it voluntarily. This is like the difference between Torah Moshe and Torah Avram, that Moshe became a commandment. Everything during the Avos was voluntary, so they volunteered to keep it, but it was never kept. So according to Rashi, the prohibition only began in Har Sinai. It didn't exist before Har Sinai. That's the way Rashi learns. The Rambam, Maimonides, in Perish HaMishayah says, listen carefully. I have a Iker Gadol, a very important lesson to teach everybody. This is a tremendous lesson I'm about to teach you, the Rambam writes. And he says, the prohibition was on Bnei Yaakov. It says it's written in Parshas by Yishlach because it applied to them. And so what do we need to twice Bnei Yaakov, and then we get it again at Har Sinai? So the Rambam says a tremendous Yesod lesson. He says, if it did apply to the children of Yaakov, but if you're asking me, why can't I eat it right now, today? Why is Gid HaNasheh prohibited to me? The fact that Bnei Yaakov didn't eat the Gid HaNasheh is totally academic and irrelevant to me. If it wasn't repeated on Har Sinai, then it's not binding on me. And therefore the Rambam says, yes, it was given to Bnei Yaakov, it was prohibited. It was prohibited to Bnei Yaakov, and it was given in Har Sinai. And the reason why we had to be repeated on Har Sinai, because it became binding on us. So that's the Rambam's principle. In general, any mitzvah that we're obligated in, it had to be given to Moshe at Har Sinai. If it wasn't repeated later on, there's nothing to do with us. And in fact, he gives another example. The Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Lamed Hey. Another example of this the Rambam gives is Milah, the mitzvah of circumcision. There's an interesting Gemara in Kuf Lamed Hey, 135 in Shabbos. The Gemara talks about the concept of, we learned last week, V'yom Hashmini, that on the 8th day you do a circumcision. And we learn out, it's also, we'll see it's repeated in Parashas Tazria as well later on. So we know the halacha, Milah is done on the 8th day, Afilu b'Shabbos, that if it's a Milah b'Zmana, if the child's born on Shabbos, and then the baby's healthy, even on Shabbos, even on Yom Kippur Shabbos, any day you want, you always do a bris milah b'Zmana, assuming you can, assuming it's a healthy child. So comes along, I think it's Rav Asi in the Gemara, and says, but you know, that only applies, he says, what about a C-section baby? What about a baby that was born through a cesarean section? So Rav Asi says, a big chiddush, he says, you know what? You can't do a milah on Shabbos. If you have a C-section baby, he says you can't do a milah on Shabbos. Why not? He says because, it's true milah was given to Avram Avinu, but it was repeated later on in Parashas Tazria. So that's why, so it's true when Avram was around, there was no difference, so therefore C-section, no, there was no tumas later, there was no tara of a tumah. So there was no distinction, perhaps during the time of Avram Avinu and after, between Avram and Matan Torah, C-sections did the milah on Shabbos. This is assuming at that point they did milah b'Shabbos. But from Sinai and onwards, why? Because if you look at the juxtaposition of the psukim, it says, Isha ki sazriya v'yelda zachar, v'tama shivash yamin, a woman becomes tummy for 7 days after the male child. Then it says, v'yom hashmini, and on the 8th day, yimo b'sara las, on the 8th day you do the circumcision. So, in fact, the Gemara tells us, why do we wait to day 8 to do a circumcision? Why not day 1? Of course, the Torah says day 8, but what's the reason why the Torah is saying day 8? So the Gemara tells us in neither, because the meal is a happy occasion, maybe not for the kid, but for everyone else there, it's a happy time. And therefore, how everyone's around a joyous occasion, and the husband and wife can't even hold hands, they can't be together. So you wait 7 days, and biblically speaking, after 7 days you become started. Today it's a different story, but biblically speaking, on day 8 they'll be permitted, and that's why we wait to day 8. So the Gemara makes a drasha from the juxtaposition of the verses. When could you have a milah on day 8? Isha ki sazriya v'yelda zach, a normal birth, a natural birth, and a woman becomes tamayan. But in theory, a C-section baby comes out from a different place. A woman does not become tamei at all. So therefore, it's a question in the Gemara whether a C-section baby you do day 1 or day 8. It's a machlokas in the Gemara. And the Baal HaMor writes, halacha, it's a sveika dedina. We're not sure. it's unclear what we follow in practical halacha. So what do? So we have a C-section baby, we go with chumrah, we're strict on both angles. So let's say it's a Tuesday baby, a Wednesday baby, any day except Shabbos, we go with day 8, because if day 1 is the day 8 still works. You can do it after the day, not before. But if it's really day 8 and you did it day 1, then you're not yotze the mitzvah milah. So therefore we always go with chumrah, we do a C-section on day 8. The only problem is, the only time you're allowed to do a milah on Shabbos, if it's a definite, a vadai milah bizmana. We have to know it's day 8, because we all know if a baby's born during ben hashmashos, during twilight, either between either Friday night, Saturday night, so we assume we're never going to have the bris on Shabbos, we're going to wait to Sunday, because maybe it should have had the bris on Friday, and now you're doing it on Shabbos, it's not the appropriate time. So it's a suffix milah bizmana. It's the same thing here. A C-section baby is a suffix milah bizmana. I don't know if it's day 1, day 8. So during the week I could do it on Shabbos, I could do it on day 8. But when day 8 falls out on Shabbos, we say no bris milah, you have to wait until Sunday. So that's the Gemara. It's interesting, the Rabbeinu Hanano quotes a interesting Gemara in Chagiga on Daf Tezvav, which talks about, it's a question whether it actually existed or not, and we'll see it, though it will be practical to us today, not exactly, but it will be, bathhouse insemination. The Gemara talks about in Chagiga how a woman became pregnant without relations, immaculate conception, whatever it was. So the question, that's the Gemara. So Rabbi Hanano comes along and says that since it was a miraculous birth, so if the baby was born on Shabbos, Rabbi Hanano writes, you cannot do the bris on Shabbos. So the question is, why? Because he says you need Isha Kisas Riyava Yolda Zachar. Just like a C-section you can't do on Shabbos. Someone born from a bathhouse insemination also can't do on Shabbos. That's Rabbi Hanano. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, in the Mincha Shlomo, one of the great poskim in Eretz Yisrael, no longer with us, he points out that the two different ways to learn Rabbeinu Hanano, and a major practical difference on which way we do. What does Rabbi Hanano mean? Any type of miraculous conception, that's what we're talking about, and that's the type of baby you can't do on Shabbos day 8? Or it doesn't have to be miraculous, any unconventional birth. What's the difference? Artificial insemination, in vitro, and go on, all the different technologies we have today where a woman can give birth. So the question is, if a child is born through artificial insemination, not uncommon, in vitro, and all those type of things, and the baby's born on Shabbos, can you do a meal on Shabbos? According to the first opinion in Rabbeinu Hanano, it's not a problem. This isn't a miraculous. I mean, everything's a miracle, as the Ramban points out. The only difference between Nes and Teva, a miracle and nature, is something that happens all the time we call nature. Something that happens once in a while we call a miracle. But as the Bali Musa point out, it's a greater miracle that the child's born than Tchias HaMesim, than the resurrection of the dead. Because a baby comes from nowhere, a putrid drop, but the body's already there to resurrect it. But to try, if you want to put headlines on the paper, I don't think baby born's going to do it. People might want to read the article if it was a resurrection of the dead. So it is what we're used to. So if it's miraculous today, it's explained by science. Artificial insemination makes sense in vitro. So then it wouldn't fall under the category. It wouldn't be a problem. According to the second possibility in Rabbi Hanano, unconventional. Well, it's not normal. So it's only one way of conventional. Everything else is unconventional. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says he thinks we have to be machmir. He thinks the second shot in Rabbeinu Hanano is the correct one. That any type of unconventional birth, not a natural birth between a man and woman with relations, and therefore he paskins that a baby born today with in vitro, artificial, cannot do, if a bris falls out on Shabbos, one cannot have the bris on Shabbos. And in fact, Rav Herschel Schechter from Yeshiva University, Rav David Bleich, also from Yeshiva University, they also agree with Rav Shlomo Zalman, and Rav Mordechai Willig as well. many poskim, it's a big chiddush. Number one is because the Gemara says that by C-section, that the birth is different. That makes sense. But here, the birth is natural. It's just the conception that's different. So number one, it's a big chiddush. But Rabbi Hanano says it, but we don't even normally pass it like Rabbi Hanano. So it's interesting how Rav Shlomo Zalman and all the other poskim seem to take, I guess when they want to, I guess Mila b'Shabbos, I mean they're giving up on the 8th day, but I guess a Mila b'Shabbos, they don't want to take a chance on a Mila she'ina b'Zmana. On the lenient side, for all those Sfardim out there, Avadja Yosef is Bekel. He says, even if you do it through in vitro, artificial insemination, it's okay, you can have the Mila on Shabbos. But either way, that's what the Gemara says over there. So, that by a C-section baby, because he says it's changed, because what's the Lashon of Gemara? Nitna Torah v'nischadsha halacha. So they write the same thing by Mila. It's true, during the time of Avraham Avinu, there was no distinction how a woman gave birth. C-section, natural. It's only once the Torah was given, and when the mitzvah of Mila was given again at Har Sinai, that we read in Pashas Tazria, so now we redefine what the mitzvah is. And therefore the same Yisod the Rambam's writing. I don't have to do Mila because of Avraham Avinu. It's totally irrelevant to me. If only Avram did it, it might be awesome for me to do because maybe I can't make a wound on myself. But certainly wouldn't be obligated to. But it's only now that it was repeated at Har Sinai, that's why I'm obligated to make sure that I get my own, every male child that has a bris milah. But again, that's the Iker Gadol of the Rambam, that all the things Kodem Matan Torah, they might be nice, and we can learn history, Makshava, Hashkafa, and learn from the model of the Avos, but in terms of obligations, why do I have to do it? That he says, by Gid HaNasha, I have to do it because it was repeated in Har Sinai. Mila, I have to do because it was repeated. It was given to Avram, it was given to Yaakov, but that's irrelevant to me. The Torah had to repeat it. So that's the two examples the Rambam gives is Mila and Gid HaNasha. However, is this so simple that anything that we can't learn mitzvahs out Kodem Matan Torah before the Torah was given? Because we find many examples in the Gemara where when they quote different, we'll see mitzvahs or not, where they quote psukim from the book of Bereshis. We'll give a couple examples. Vayashkem Avram baboker, when Avram by the Akedah, Avram got up early in the morning, and we learn out the principle. The Gemara tells us in Psachim, Zrizin Magdimin LaMitzvahs, that you have to, when you have an obligation to do a mitzvah, you do it as soon as possible. That's the minhag by Amila, at least until lately, that we try to do it in the morning, the first possible time. But they quote the pasuk by Avraham. That's Kodem Matan Torah. Another one they quote also by Havchana. There's halacha of Havchana that if a woman divorce, a husband and wife get divorced, they separate. So in order for the woman to remarry, she has to wait at least 3 months. Why? Because we want to make sure we got to know who daddy is. Because if they had a child the next day and next week, we're not going to show who the father is. And again, they quote a pasuk, I think at the end of this week's parsha, or Lechach or Zarecha. They quote a pasuk in either Lechach or Vayera. Again, another halacha, they quote from Kodem Matan Torah. Or another one, we have a principle, Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, that we don't want to mix different simchas. That's why you don't get married on Yantif. Your wife deserves her own simcha, your own day of wedding. Yantiv's her own simcha. We don't want to mix different simchas. And where do we know it from? They quote the pasuk in Sefer Bereshis, Male Shvuazos, by Yaakov Avinu, when he was marrying Leah and Rachel. He said, no, I need to spend all time with Leah, then we'll do Rachel later. So again, from Kodem Matan Torah, we seem to be quoting all these psukim. So how do we reconcile that one? And the Rambam tells us, the Yisod Gadol, that we don't learn mitzvahs Kodem Matan Torah, yet the Gemara seems to give us quotes from Gemaras and that tell us that we do. So the Netziv in the Meishiv Davar and other places, he wants to make a distinction between the different types of mitzvahs. He wants to ask, why should we make a distinction? In other words, is there any reason not to learn out things before Matan Torah? Like why should I think it's based on the Yerushalmi? The Jerusalem Talmud says we don't learn. It's different. it's a question how you learn the Yerushalmi. He's saying it in a question, or to me, meaning you do or you don't. So different texts within the Jerusalem Talmud. So the Netziv asks, why not learn? Right? You're telling me, Vayaskim Avram al-Boker, we see Avram's passion, his zealousness. That's not a good thing. Forget, once the Torah comes, let's get rid of that midah. Why is there any reason not to learn now? Or Havchana, we don't care about who the father is anymore? Or B'samachta b'chagech, we don't think it's a good idea that we should separate the simchas? So the Netziv says anything that's logical, it's a mitzvah sichlas, it's not even a mitzvah, it's something done in a logical way, and have no reason to make a distinction between Kodem and Torah and after. These are the different midos. We see the Gemara is learning all these different midas from Kodem and Torah. That's okay to learn out from. And we'll see, perhaps it's even a deraisa, we'll see. It might even be biblical, Kodem and Torah. But when it comes to Mila, that's not a logical thing. Why would I think of going ahead and doing a bris milah? Why would I want to do a surgery on myself? Or gid hanasha, not to eat from the gid hanasha. So those I need, when it comes to technical mitzvahs, I need a hagdara that why I should keep milah, why I gid hanasha. But different mitzvahs that make sense logically, the Netziv writes, why shouldn't I think that? So therefore this is very relevant to our case, the beginning of this week's parasha, but the whole Sefer Bereshis. We say, Vayera Elav Hashem be'elonei, God appeared to Avraham be'elonei Mamre. So very good, God appeared to Avraham. So usually when God's appearing, meaning it's a nevuah, God's giving a message, usually, and right afterwards, and God told Avraham, this is what I want you to do. The next pasuk, we wake up, there are 3 Arabs are running around, Avram's running away from God, taking care of these people. What was the purpose of God's visit here? So that's what the Rashi quotes from the Chazal. He came to Mavaker es Achola. He came to do Bikar Cholim. Avram was recovering, 99, 100 years old, recovering from major surgery, and therefore he went to visit Avram Avinu. So we see God was participating in Bikar Cholim, and we find the Gemara, and we'll get into more next week, but the many Gemaras quoting different sources, Remez, Bikar Cholim, and not just Bikar Cholim, but that's the one we're on, Nicham Avelim, all Kfuras Meis, the Gemaras throughout, and the Darim, Bava Metzia, all quoting these sources, and they quote different psukim from Kodem and Torah, some they quote from after, but they quote, so why is it, so what's the status of these things? So some point out the discussion among the Achronim that what about, so we see if something that the Torah, the Chazon Ish has this by the mitzvah of Kibbud Avim. Kibbud Avim, honoring one's parents. The Gemara in Kiddushin gives us specific guidelines. What do we have to do? There's covered, we have to get them water, we have to get them this. And Yira, Kibbud, we have to do things, we can't sit in the sea. The Gemara goes to, and the Shulchan Aruch quotes specifics, the do's and don'ts of Kibbud Avim. So the Chazon Ish asks, but what about the general? Let's say it's not one of those things listed in the Shulchan Aruch, not one of those specific examples. The general idea that I have to honor my parents in a general way. Where do I know that? It means I don't have to do that? So that's what the Chazon Ish develops, not just the Chazon Ish. We'll see others, they have this concept called the Ratzon HaTorah. Any good concept, it could be perverted and taken out of context. But what the Chazon Ish writes is it's called the Ratzon HaTorah, that we could glean if we see what the Torah talks about, what the Torah tells me, the whole Sefer Bereshis. If God did Bikar Cholim, if Avram did Bikar Cholim, if he did Achnosis Archim, we could figure out that's a good thing to do. If the others are doing it, it's a good thing to do. And in fact, that's what Rav Asher Weiss in the Minchas Asher writes. The Gemara tells us in Bava Metzia, well, the Torah tells us the prohibition of Sar Balei Chayim, of not causing harm to animals. So the Gemara, it's a discussion, the Gemara Bava Metzia, the Gemara Paskins, we Paskin, it's a biblical prohibition to cause Sar for if it's not for human benefit, if there's no reason for doing it, it's a biblical prohibition. So the question is, where's the source? It's nice, it's a biblical prohibition, but there's no explicit pasuk in the Torah, or maybe there are many, but there's not one explicit pasuk. So Rav Asher Weiss in the Sefer, he quotes about 11 possible sources he's trying to figure out what's biblical, so where is it? So a couple of them that come to mind. One, he says, by Sar Ba'Echayim, he says the prohibition of not to muzzle your animal when if he's working in the fields and there's food, you have to let them feed him. He quotes also in terms of the story with Bilam, with the donkey, that we see Bilam was punished for hitting the donkey, and Prika, the loading, unloading, and he goes on. So the point being is, there's a biblical prohibition of Sar Ba'Echayim. It's just not clear exactly what's clear, what the Radvaz writes is, we could glean from what we look in the Torah that obviously mistreating animals is a serious crime. It's a serious avera, whether I could find an actual source or not. So the Chazon says kibbud avim, it's the rice on the biblical level, but even though the technical hagdara might just be, there might be specifics do and know, but on general level we have to honor our parents, and that's what some achronim write the same thing here. We could glean is hadhagas from the avos that we see. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, all the imos, everyone doing it for the whole parashas. If the Torah is talking about positive, what they're doing, so that perhaps that could take, that even though there's no specific source, but that could also be on a level of a daraisa, could be on a biblical law, one has an obligation to do. In fact, some achronim even take it even more. It's what they call a super mitzvah, or we'll call a meta mitzvah. In other words, we know we have a principle, derech eretz kadma Torah. That's why the famous Rashi in the beginning of Sefer Bereshis, why begin with mitzvahs? Why not begin with mitzvahs? Why do we wait for our first mitzvah in Parashas Bo? What do you mean the first mitzvah? We have many mitzvahs, but the first mitzvah given to Klal Yisrael as a whole, many individuals were given mitzvahs, but the first time the Klal Yisrael were given as a whole, that was in Parashas Bo Kiddush HaChodesh. So why not begin with mitzvahs if the whole point of the Torah is to do the mitzvahs? So Rashi writes, so with the famous part of Rashi is he's saying he wanted to make sure that he wanted to tell everyone that he created the world and he gave Eretz Yisrael to us. This parenthetically we see interesting in that Rashi, he says the Umas Ha'olam were there first. He said we should know that therefore we could throw the 7 nations out of Israel and then we can move in. So what's the pshat in that anyway? Parenthetically, why if I was God, I would have just put the Jewish people in first. Why get into involvement? People there before us. It's true that and again, this Rashi is for us, not for them. They don't care what it says in Rashi. It's the Jews have to know Israel belongs to us. I'm not worried about the non-Jews knowing that. So it points out that we just see interesting that there's a certain level that the Kochas Hatuma, even the most corrupt and evil nations worship idols, yet they're attracted to Kedusha. We find that strange attraction. That's what Rav Soloveitchik explained, the famous Gemara at the end of Makis, that we probably have heard many times if you had to see them, where Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues are by the Beis HaMikdash, the Churban Habayis, it was destroyed, and they see a fox coming out of the Temple Mount, and all the rabbis are crying, and Rabbi Akiva is laughing. He says, what are you laughing about? He says, well, just like the first part came true, it was destroyed, so too I know it's going to be rebuilt. So Rav Soloveitchik said in Yiddish, he said, what's the fox doing in the Temple Mount? He couldn't find a foxhole, he couldn't find him a nice home, but the fox represents the Kochas Hatuma. Somehow, the void when Kedusha leaves, that's so we see how everyone's attracted to Kedusha, to the land of Eretz Yisrael. Even if you're not a holy nation, everyone's attracted. But getting back, so how does that answer the question? What is so good? So tell me that after the Torah is given. Why do you have to begin to this? So people skip the middle part of Rashi, which Rashi writes, B'shel koach ma'asav higil li'amo. That first, you know why? Because God first wanted to teach us our potential. And you can have all the mitzvahs in the world. You can have oil underneath your yard. If you don't know it's there, it's not going to help you. If you have diamonds, but you think it's glass, it's not going to help you. The mitzvahs are going to go so far. You have to know what you're accomplishing. Go follow around the avos. You can see, you can be an Avram Avinu, you could be a Sodom and Amorah, you could be a Cain, you could be the whole Sefer Bereshis, we learn our potential. Only once we know our potential, then we're ready for the Torah. So Derech Eretz Kamal Torah, so some Achronim learn that it is more than a mitzvah. This is a prerequisite for Matan Torah, kind of like the Machlokes Rishonim by the first commandment. The first commandment of the Aseret HaDibros is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. So some count it, that's a mitzvah. That's one of the commandments, that to believe in God. And other Rishonim say, no, it's not a mitzvah. So they ask, how could you say it's not a mitzvah? So the Bahags or others explain that no, when they're saying it's not a mitzvah, it's more than a mitzvah. It's a prerequisite, because if you don't believe in God, there's nothing else to discuss. You got to establish the foundation. Once you have a foundation, then you can talk about doing mitzvahs. The same thing here. It's true there's no source per se, maybe there are many sources the Gemara gives, but in terms of Bika Cholam, Achnosis, all these things, you're not going to, where's the pasuk in the Torah? You might not be able to find one, but the fact that you can't find an explicit pasuk doesn't mean it's not a biblical concept. Like we find by Sar Bali Chayim, like we find, and as the Chazon Ish writes by Kibbutz Aveim as well, that we find that there's like the Rambam writes, V'hafta l'recha kamocha is a general mitzvah involving all the Be'adim L'chaveros, and he writes, Midivrei Sofrim, rabbinically, you're commanded in visiting the sick, you're commanded in entertaining guests, burying someone. So what the Rambam is saying, it's that maybe the chiyuv is only, maybe the technical obligation is only rabbinical, but when you fulfill Bikor Cholem, when you do all these mitzvahs, Hachnasis Archam, Bikor Cholem, you're involved in a biblical mitzvah, not just a rabbinical mitzvah. And in fact, that's why along these lines we find the same concept by Milah. They're also actually from a Rashi in this week's parsha, that the first Rashi talks about that God came to visit Avram, and Rashi says the Gemara in Bava Metzia, Yom Shlishti L'Milaso is the third day after circumcision. So the question is, first there's the question, why didn't he come the first and second day? So that maybe we'll get into next week. There's an interesting Gurari that maybe the mitzvah of Bikar Chum only applies if you're very sick. How sick do you have to be to, of course you can visit them anyway, but how sick do you have to be for there to be a chiyuv of a Bikar Cholam? Now maybe... Yeah, right, that's exactly like the Gemara says by Shechem, when they were they waited to the third day and then they destroyed Shechem. So there's a question, an interesting question in the Rishonim, is it Dafka Yom Shlishi? Is that the worst time, or third also? But of course 1 and 2 is. So that's a discussion the Ram brings down. So and he brings down a tremendous nafkamina to this question. That we know, as we were discussing Milah, so we know a Milah Bizmana can be done on Shabbos, but a Milah Shalom Bizmana cannot be done on Shabbos. Is there any other day that a Milah Shalom Bizmana cannot be done besides Shabbos? So that's the question here. Is one permitted to have a Milah Shalom Bizmana on Thursday or a Friday? Let's say the baby is supposed to be done on Wednesday, jaundice, Billy Rubin, whatever you want, the Mola doesn't show up, so now it's Thursday. Do I go ahead and do the Milah Shalom Bizmana? So this parenthetically, people who know the Behuda used to scream Chai V'Kayim. About some people, they think once you don't make the 8th day, then there's no rush anymore. And in fact, he quotes, I guess there was a minig in his town, or someone wrote to him, that when there was a Milah Shalom Bizmana, I assume it wasn't now, but close to Pesach, but we know there's a minig of the firstborn's fasting, Erev Pesach, so we do a siyam. So some towns they used to wait for a Milah Shalom Bizmana. I don't know if they didn't do it Bizmana, but let's assume already it was. So they figured, let's wait to Erev Pesach already. So he said that he was very strongly against, you can't, we're talking about a kares here, you have to do it as quick as possible. So we always try to do it immediate. So the question is, what about Thursday and Friday? So the question is 2 issues. One is, there's an issue of that if you do the bris on Thursday, so Shabbos is going to be day 3. So therefore you might have to go to the doctor, you might have to go to your hospital, you might have to do dichoy yisurim, you might have to go do things that, in order, now that you're in danger, you're allowed to do, but we don't put ourselves in a situation where we want to have to machal Shabbos if we could help it. So there's one issue of, I might have to put myself where I have to do something on Shabbos I wouldn't ordinarily do, and even if not, bitul oneg Shabbos. I'm supposed to enjoy that day. If I just came back from oral surgery, I'm looking at David, or some other thing, so then maybe I shouldn't be doing it on a Thursday and Friday. Of course, in Canada, with elective surgery, that's a major question. The person talking about elective surgery. in Canada you might have to wait 6 years, so maybe it's a different issue. But in theory, could I choose to do an elective surgery on Thursday or Friday? So that's so Rav Moshe and other poskim say if you could help it, it's better not to for these reasons, because you don't want to lead to Gorim Chilul Shabbos or just Bitul Oneg Shabbos. So so I think the Svardim. So I think by Milo Shalom Bisman, I think the Minhag Ashkenaz we do it on Thursday and Friday. We're not concerned, I guess, because of the Chiyuv Karet. I think the minhag among the Svardim is they don't. I heard that once it's a Milo Shalom Bisman, they wait until Sunday, which I guess people like Sunday anyway. They're not going to get any complaints. And there's also a shiloh by a ger. Because a ger, you can convert the ger anytime. So you have to do his Mila on, so maybe you shouldn't do the Mila on Thursday or Friday. Or maybe he's not Jewish at that point, so it doesn't make a difference. So that's a discussion there. But those are all part of this issue. So there's an interesting machlokas Ramban Baal Amor based on the Gemara in Shabbos. That the Gemara talks about machitin katan, that during the days of the Gemara, today we have modern technology, we don't really need it, but you wash the baby with hot water before the Mila and after the Mila for health reasons. So that's what you have to do. So everyone agrees if you did the Mila on Shabbos and then the kids were running around and they kicked over the bucket of water, so we go, well, sorry, the kid's going to die, so obviously you have to go ahead and get to that to Shiloh, whether you can Amir Lenachri on a Malacha Daraisa, etc. Either way, you have to, it's a sakana, you go ahead and heat up the hot water. You get hot water, that's not a question, everyone agrees to that. No one says let the kid die. However, the question is like this. What happens if you didn't do the bris yet, and one of the kids kicked over the water? Now you know that you're not going to have the water after the bris. Could I do the bris meal right now on Shabbos, knowing that right after I do the meal, I'm going to have to go Machal Shabbos and heat up hot water? So that's the machlokas, the Ramban and Baal Hamor. The Ramban writes, Einucha mitzvah elo l'shaitza. I only have a mitzvah in its proper time. I don't have to make cheshbonos. I don't have to start thinking about. The Torah tells me, Yom HaShmini Yim Avasar Lasso, you go ahead, do the mitzvah, and let the chips fall where they may. If it's a sakana, I'll go ahead and heat up hot water. I have to do my mitzvah meal on day 8. And the Baal Hamor says, no, it's true we don't make cheshbonos. There is an Indian of tamimis, but that's something that's going to happen next week, 2 weeks, maybe a couple of days. But this is being roles ha'ezo ha'chacham ha'roles ha'nola. I know it's going to happen right away. So the Baal Hamor says you can't put yourself in a situation where if you know 5 minutes later it's going to go reim chilul Shabbos. It'll be therefore the Baal Hamor says wait until. So that's the machlokas, the Ramban Baal Hamor. We'll get into that topic another time. The Machaber Paskins like the Baal Hamor in that situation. Wait till Sunday. It's not really nagaya today. We have other antibiotics, so we don't necessarily need the water. But that's so. The question is, what is the Isser according to the Baal Hamor? According to the Ramban, everything's fine. While I'm doing the mitzvah, it's a mila. It's a chiyuv. It's the 8th day. And according to the Baal Hamor and according to the Ramban, once the kid's in danger, I have to heat up the hot water. What exactly is the problem? What's the problem with the Baal? What do you mean it's us? So what? According to the Baal Hamor agrees. If you went ahead and did the bris milah, of course you heat up hot water. So according to the Baal Hamor, the milah is good if you did it, and anyway, if you did it, you have to do it. So what did you violate? Rabbi, what did I do wrong? What pasuk is there? So that's what. So Rav Shlomo Zalman writes. It's only the Baal Hamor is only talking about Durabanan. There's nothing wrong biblically at all. It's a Durabanan. Others say maybe you violated the like an Isser Aseh and Aseh Shabbaton. But based on what we're saying, I want to suggest the following. What you violated with the Chaz and Ish's concept of Ratzon HaTorah. That basically we could glean, that Shabbos is very important, and Milah, and doing something that you shouldn't be doing. So maybe you violated an Issa D'Oraisa in that case. Like this interesting machlokas, the Minchas Chinuch and the Noda B'Yehuda in the beginning of Psachim. The Gemara is talking about Karban Pesach. There's halacha by Karban Pesach by the time, different discussion, what time is it? Chatzos, Nate. But if you're farther, Derech Rechoka, the Torah says, if you're far away from the Beis HaMikdash, you're exempt from the mitzvah of Karban Pesach. And then you could we'll discuss, you bring Pesach Sheni. So the question is, let's say I know where the line is, and I want to make sure I get on the other side before. I want to make sure I'm exempt. So I'm running, I'm driving fast, I can get on the other side of the boundary. So if I get to the other side of the boundary, everyone agrees, you're putter. The question is, did I do anything wrong? By dafka going derech rechokas, I don't have to bring the carbon pesach. So the Yehuda says it's very strict halachas. No, you didn't do anything wrong. No problem. The Minchas Chinuch says just the opposite. He says, not only did you do something wrong, you're mavatel a mitzvahs aseh. Very strong words. Mavatel mitzvahs is I'm chayiv in the carbon pesach, and now I'm not doing it. The Minchas Chinuch is saying is, by specifically making yourself exempt from the mitzvah, they both seem very extreme. To say I did nothing wrong doesn't seem right. I excluded myself in the mitzvah. And to say I'm about to mitzvah, I didn't really about to. So perhaps it's along the lines we're saying. It's about dichoy surim, that you've violated the Ratzon HaTorah. You know, God wants us to bring the carbon pesach on Pesach. So you specifically going away from what He's telling you, that's enough. And that's why Bilam knew what he was doing. That's what the Rabbi Chanan Wasserman writes. Bilam knew what he was doing was wrong, but he tried to do, God didn't tell me I can't do it. But everyone, that's the deraisa. If you know what's wrong, a Ratzon HaTorah. Of course, like any principle, you could take Das Torah and then pervert it to the other extreme. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about what we glean from the Avos. And in fact, it's interesting to note that by many mitzvahs, usually, by Shabbos and kosher, the Torah tells us by instruction how to keep Shabbos. The Gemara goes to whole end, how to keep Shabbos, how to keep kosher. It's interesting when it comes to the mitzvah Bikar Cholim, the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim, the Torah doesn't say, do Bikar Cholim. What does the Torah give us? Examples, demonstration. So perhaps it's telling us a more deeper lesson. When it comes to mitzvahs makom, that may be instructions between man and God. Instructions are powerful enough. When it comes to midos, when it comes to learning good deeds, we know it all starts at the home or the yeshiva or wherever the person is. That a person sees, you see your parent doing, their friends doing it, and therefore that's how we learn. We learn specifically by example, and that's why the Torah specifically has all these examples in Sefer Bereshis, because that's how the instruction has to be. And interesting, we said, to conclude, we talked about putting yourself in a situation to exempt yourself. We see the opposite from Avram Avinu. Again, we don't have to look too far. The beginning, the first couple of psukim in the parasha. So what does it say? Avram, why was it very hot outside? Because Avram, based on Chazal, he wanted to fulfill the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim, but God wanted him to rest, so He made it very hot so no one should come. So the question is, what's he worried about on Hachnasas Orchim? But if someone comes into the community, I see someone in shul, I see someone without a place, I'll go and ask him. I have to go look around. I'm going to start walking around the streets looking. If there's no one here, what's bothering Avram Avinu? But we see is that's what Avram's teaching us. That hug of Avram Avinu and the others is that enough? Forget about running on the other side of Derech Rechoka, avoiding Karban Pesach, getting into a situation where you have to be Gorem Chilul Shabbos. But not only that, you have to go to the other extreme. You have to put yourself in a situation where you have to do as many mitzvahs as possible. And that's what we see by Moshe Rabbeinu as well. Moshe was mitzvah to fulfill the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, of the mitzvahs Atruyas Ba'aretz, that is. So, what's he getting all worked up about? If you live in Toronto, you can't do them. So, if I'm in Israel, I worry about Trumas and Mises. We do have to worry about it somewhat, but we don't really have to worry about it. Shemitah, all that. So no, but the pshat is Moshe Rabbeinu had so much tsar that he couldn't do it. He was in a situation. Of course, he would do something he has to do, but the fact that he was in a situation exempt, that bothered him. And that's the same thing in the mitzvah of tzitzis. That the mitzvah of tzitzis is, technically speaking, if you're wearing a four-cornered garment, you're obligated to put tzitzis on. But if I'm not wearing a four-cornered garment, I don't have to. In fact, that's the Gemara Menachos. A person wasn't doing it, and the angel came down and said, Katina, Katina. That's his name, Katina. Tzitzis matahei. What's with the mitzvah of tzitzis? So the Gemara goes on. So he said, obviously he didn't have to keep it. So the Gemara goes, so right, technically speaking, you're right, you're exempt. But b'shas rischa, when the time when God gets steamy and gets upset, watch out. The tzitzis could have protected. You're right, you're not going to get punished for not wearing, but when God's upset about something else, the tzitzis could protect you. Basically, it's a life insurance policy. So why do I have to wear tzitzis? I'm not wearing a 4-corner garment. So on one hand, I can't find you any source, but that's exactly what the chazan is. It's clear the Torah wants us to wear tzitzis. So by not wearing tzitzis on a certain level, you're violating a deraisa. And in terms of midos and putting yourself, not learning from the midos of Avraham Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's the concept here. So let's just summarize. We are discussing the different mitzvahs that we do and don't learn Kodem Matan Torah. We started off with the Gid Hanasha, and we basically said that as the Rambam's other Rishonim said it was only given Har Sinai. The Rambam's Yesod Gadol it was given to Bnei Yaakov, it was also given to us. And the reason why it was given to us is because it's only binding on us if it was given to Har Sinai. That's why Milo also. There was no difference in C-section until later on when the Torah was given. And then we went into the issue of bathhouse insemination, artificial insemination, all those questions about Bila B'Shabbos. And yet, so we see by Gid HaNasha and Mila, one cannot learn out Kodem Matan Torah, we have to repeat it. Yet we find other mitzvahs. Separating, a wife has to wait 3 months to remarry, not to mix different simchas, to have passion, to do the mitzvah as soon as possible. We do learn out Kodem Matan Torah. And that's what the Siv writes, when it comes to technical halachas, that we need to tell us from Har Sinai. But to learn from our avos, to learn a model of behavior, that can even be learning out, be Kodem Matan Torah. Not only can we learn it out, but as some Acharonim say, not only is it the right of the mitzvah, maybe it's a mega mitzvah. Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah, it's the foundation. If you don't have midos, if you don't have your choshes, you're not even a yid, as the Gemara tells us. If you don't have the basic midos of Rachmanis, Baishanis, we're choshes for yidichas. You're probably not a Jew then, because that's the super mitzvah. And that's what we point out. Not only do we avoid situations where we put ourselves by Karban Pesach, or in the case of Mila, not only don't we put ourselves in a situation to avoid mitzvahs, but we learn from Avraham Avinu, from Moshe Rabbeinu, we go out of our way to put ourselves in a situation where we go, even if we are exempt and there's no reason that we have to, we go ahead and try to find all the mitzvahs we can.